Welcome to this episode of the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brother David Roberts. I have with me the OG, Dr. Neil Holmes, and back from a short vacation, the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, we don't have a guest this week, so we're going to talk about a couple of topics. First, let's start off with the amazing impact of, Dr. Ray Winbush, who we had on last week. He talked a lot about his involvement with the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. I had such positive feedback on it. In fact, the greatest compliment I had from somebody was, they said, thanks for asking open-ended questions, shutting up and allowing Dr. Winbush to talk. So, I was like, all right, cool. That's what I do best. Brother Neil, Dr. Holmes, what did you think of Brother Winbush's participation last week?
Yeah, I thought it was excellent, and I think what was important was the fact that he was actually involved in this film. I saw another interview with Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., chairman of the Black Panther Cubs, and he was saying that it was really a struggle between the creative impulse of the people who were doing the film and the attempt to get the story right, to get the story right. And I think the thing that I left most with from Dr. Winbush was the fact that this can create a conversation. What happens after the film, it depends on us to really spark a conversation in our community about the events and about the process that led to the events in Chicago with the assassination of Fred Hampton, and what do we need to go from here? How do we go forward from here in terms of organizing our people around some similar kinds of ways that Fred Hampton did? The one thing that I would kind of disagree with him a little bit was that I think when we look at the movement today, I think it's a different type of leadership. I don't think it's the same type of leadership that we had during that particular period, where you had kind of a single leader that you can point to. And I think that might emerge. But right now we have a lot of local leaders, a lot of young people. You've got young people, 17 years old, putting out 10,000 people in the streets all across the country. You've got kids in these little towns, putting out demonstrations, and they're surrounded by, 700, 800 racists and stuff. So a new type of leadership that we'll be able to see and maybe be able to identify more closely is going to emerge. But right now, that local leadership, I think, is really quite important.
And you make a good point, because one movement that I think about is the strides that the LGBTQ community has made in the last 30 years. And Dre, you may be a little, young to remember this, but like in 87, 88, when I was college age, we used to use the word fag all the time. Like there was nothing wrong with it. Now 30 years later, that word has almost been like removed from the lexicon. You can't say that now. I used to be at jobs and vice presidents would use that word. Now it's been totally removed. And when you think of the strides that the LGBTQ community has made, there's no one leader to pinpoint, because when you have one leader, one person that's visible, like whether it was a Martin Luther King or Fred Hampton or, later on Jesse Jackson Farrakhan or whatever, not only can you assassinate them physically, you can assassinate their character, because we're all human beings and we're all flawed. So it seems like when you have, I'm agreeing with you, Dr. Holmes, like Brother Winbush was saying that we don't have any leadership, but you're saying more so we do. We just have, it's local, and it's just not that one prominent figure. And I think it can work better that way in many cases.
Yeah, and we're going to get a group of leaders that are going to emerge out of this thing, but it's not going to be a single And it never was really a single dominant leader. I mean, when you had King, you also had, you had Kwame Ture, or Stokely Carmichael, as he was known then. You had CORE, you had all kinds of organizations with leaders, and you had what they used to call the Big Six among the civil rights leaders. So you had that group of leaders. You certainly had the people who were really out front, like a King. And you also had, beyond that, you had, the union movement, the anti-war movement. You had so many things in the mix going on during that period.
And Andre, I want to hear from you on this, because Dr. Holmes makes a good point when he's like, there was so many leaders, but Dr. King stood out. Now, with all due respect to him, and Dr. Wimbush kind of touched on this last week, we know he was propelled to the forefront because he was considered safe, Now, you, as someone who's worked directly in the media, newsprint, myself, I hosted a TV show in Philly. What would you say to that about how do you think the media sort of picks leaders in the Black community and propels them to the forefront?
That's a difficult one. I would say yes and no to that one. When you think about the media influence and identifying leaders in the Black community, first thing that comes to mind is MOVE in Philadelphia, where the media, journalists who covered MOVE exclusively developed these backgrounds on each individual that was within MOVE. And they would say, this person's the one in charge. I mean, this person's second in command, this person's third in command. And the question is, how do you know the infrastructure if it's not publicly put out? Within MOVE, I know that they had like their own little Bible. And this is after interviews I've done with Ramona Africa and talked to her directly about this. John Africa was the leader and founder of MOVE. But to know who the second, third, and fourth person is, when you think about the media influence, it doesn't take much for somebody to say John Doe, second in command, and it could be false. And the media, members of the media are humans, which means that they're flawed.
Right.
Case in point, just looking at what happened with Tiger Woods, he went from being extracted from the jaws of life to a crowbar, and it's the media spin, the desire to get it first. The slogan used to be "Get it first, but get it right."
Right.
Now is "Get it first, and we'll go ahead and retract if we have to." So with that power, you're in the crux of it all. Like, what am I supposed to believe? Who am I supposed to believe? And then you have this invention of cable news, where you have CNN, you have MSNBC, you have Fox. You have all of these slanted views that pretty much feeds to their individual bases. And within that, they can create this hysteria where it's like, this is the person who we're going to put in the forefront, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And that's just the way it goes.
Now, it's funny, I was going to talk about media manipulation a little later, but oftentimes on our program, the conversation just takes us where it takes us. So why don't we jump into that now? Like yesterday, I sent both of you guys a YouTube video, and it was something my son shared with me. And I don't know if it was supposed to be a satire, or whatever the case may be. But just to explain to the people watching, there was a gentleman who talked about how he sold news pieces to Fox and CNN. So if he saw Black people being harassed by the cops, he would get that little clip and send it to CNN. But then if those same Black people were misbehaving 5 minutes of, doing something before the cops came and accosted them that they shouldn't have been doing, he'll send that piece to Fox News, So do you think that's strictly entertainment, giving the people what they want, or is there a deeper rooted agenda at play?
It's twofold, actually. What you do have, and this is nothing new. Years ago, when I worked in Delaware, we'd have those news chasers that bought tens of $1,000s worth of equipment, and in some cases would beat the actual news crews there you know, before before they got rid of the crime scene or whatever case you were going to. And you'd have it where the individual would specifically sell to Channel 6, which was the largest station in the area and it was based out of Philly, or they would, or it would be Channel 3, KYW. And what you'd have is you'd have two different presentations of how it was just based off of who your viewers are. You know, growing up in Philadelphia as a Black man, uh, we gravitated to Channel 6 for whatever reason, I don't know. It just was what it was. But I've been in homes with older whites, and it's more of Channel 3. So it's pretty much your CNN and your Fox on a local level. Not saying that they're slanted in the way they present, but you do notice differences in the way that things are conducted. And KYW is in the midst of a problem right now where they're talking about how their general manager was practicing racist tactics by who they let on air and who they wouldn't let on air, and how they brought one young Black girl, I believe she was from Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken, and she was there for 2-3 months, and they let her go already because they didn't like who she was and what she represented. And what she represented was a change in the way that news is going to be delivered to the African American community. You have long-standing people like a Yuki Washington, and for lack of better words, he is the Black representation. We go back to the media picking the representation. Yuki became the voice of the Black community for Channel 3, whereas Rick, what is his name? I don't remember Rick's name in Philadelphia on Channel 6, but it's just like, oh, there's Rick, you know, and people knew him as Rick. You know, he was just the household guy, you know. So the way that they present the news became, Channel 6 is more urban, more on the ground. Channel 3, because their main circulation is Philadelphia, is going to be the things that matter to Philadelphians. When you think of Philadelphians, everybody thinks Philadelphia is a Black city, not realizing that the majority is white. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to news manipulation, I mean, it starts local and it goes national. And I think that when you look at some of the people like a Don Lemon, who started off in Philadelphia and escalated to CNN, you know, you see early on, everybody gave Don hell. And he was talking, oh, you know, there are people smoking marijuana in Ferguson. They're getting high. The people are crazy. And then you sit back and you realize, oh, that's right. He was with Channel 3. Mm-hmm. You know, so you have these moments where you wonder if people are being groomed to present news a certain way. You know, and then, you know, going back to Move, just the way that whole situation unfolded. And I did a documentary on Move and spoke with one of the journalists who covered it. And what it was is they identified members of Move, they created a database, and whenever they wanted somebody new to talk about, they just picked and pulled. And that's just what it was. So often what they were being fed were things directly from the police department. And when you look back now at that situation, it's like no wonder that, you know, Move were these bad people. The journalists at the time were just taking all of this input directly from the police, taking it as the gospel, and it really wasn't. So you do have this media manipulation because they're being manipulated too. Not saying they don't have a hand in it, but it's twofold. We're being manipulated and played because people are giving us what to do, but however, people are still buying our newspapers, turning to our stations, so we're winning. We're going to ride this pony until we can't ride it anymore. And the only people that really suffer the most are the individuals who are being covered. You know, you do see a difference in coverage. And I've noticed this throughout my career. I was a journalist for 15 years at different papers around the country. And you notice who gets covered a certain way. You know, I never forget one night, there was 2 homicides on Christmas Eve one year. One in the Black neighborhood, in the projects, one in the fluid white neighborhood. Mm-hmm. The Black one led because the white one, well, you know, it was a misunderstanding. Nah, he killed that man on purpose, you know, the same way the Black people did. So there are instances where you do see that as an issue. And, you know, there's a shooting in a Black community. The one thing that I never agreed with was digging up the past of the person who was killed, because it's not going to impact them now, especially if it was a past, you know, when I say past, I'm talking significant amount of years, you know, more than 10. And you'd see that dug up and put in there. You know, 10 years ago, this person had a joint, and you know, this could be a reason for nobody that I have ever known of has been killed over a joint.
Right.
You know, but you have this manipulation where, you know, the word victim turns into suspect easily. And it's nothing new in this country. You know, we can go back to, if you want to take it far enough back, you know, you can go back to New Orleans, where, and you know, freed blacks were coming into port, and this is, you know, during enslavement. You board a boat in Haiti or Cuba for America after you gained your independence, and you're on a boat, and then all of a sudden you get switched over to property. So when you get off the boat, you're no longer a person. You're not even a victim anymore. Now you're just property. And it continues. You see this manifested throughout the media, where the lives of inner city people, they're not the victims. They're the means to us getting our ratings.
You know, the one thing that I always think about when I think of the media, the disparity in the media. And Dr. Holmes, I'm gonna come to you in a minute, because I want to delve into if is there a deeper rooted meaning or purpose behind the bias, you know, much deeper rooted, as opposed to just giving people what they want. But the example that I always think of is the Columbine shooting and then the Trayvon Martin shooting. And I remember the Columbine shooting, when those kids went into the school and shot up people, you know, the trench coat mafia, bunch of white kids. There was a lot of compassion for them. And I felt compassion too, because I understand, you know, coming from working in a high school, I understand bullying and how that can impact people and how people can lose it. I had some compassion. I hated what they did, but there was a certain amount of compassion I had as well. And I noticed that those kids were never referred to as thugs. They never said these armed thugs came into this school and shot it up. It was like, oh, they were picked on, they were bullied, you know. But then when you talk about a young guy growing up in the hood, if you could pardon that expression, there's never any sympathy for him for what he's gone through, you know, in his situation. Then fast forward a few years later to the Trayvon Martin shooting. He was a complete victim. He wasn't doing anything. You know, even when people found out, oh, he lived in the neighborhood and he was just walking home from the store, you know, going back to his dad's house, there was no compassion for him, you know, from the media. There was from our community, but not from the media. You know, he was presented as a thug, you know. So that's what I always think about, those two examples, when I think about media disparity. But Dr. Holmes, do you think it's a deeper meaning? Is there manipulation for a purpose?
Well, you have to look at media as part of the structure of power in the country. And when we talk about big media, you know, CNNs and Foxes, or you're talking about your local news stations, and you know, it's part of a capitalist system. They're there to make money, but they're also there to uphold the system. And our system is a particular type of system in which African people are colonized, so to speak, inside this a country. And early on, you know, I'm from Virginia, and Virginia is we call it the Old Dominion. It was the first of the white dominions of the British, you know, British settlements. And once slavery was introduced, what was interesting about this thing, slavery, is that black people were super visual. You know, we were hyper. You know, you talk about the invisible man, but we were never invisible. We were super visible. Right. And whites who in England were criminals and whatnot could just merge into the society, but we always stood out, and this was on purpose. We always had, we were always a focal point. You talk about this use of the word thug for black folks, especially black men, and that's an interesting word itself. It comes from India. It's a Hindi word, thuggy, And these were the people who were fighting for independence against the British when they colonists, but the British turned it into a criminal word. So they criminalized those people who fought for independence. And we are criminalized in this country. And this criminalization is a process that occurs over and over again to strip us of our right to have political power and our right to accumulate wealth. Just one other thing, you know, and if you look at these, for instance, the Sinclair Broadcasting, owned by the Mercer family, has the largest number of televisions in the country, mostly in smaller markets, and they are tightly allied with Donald Trump. And they support, you know, they give money to some of those issues that are, you know, similar to that. They started Parler, the social media company where a lot of the right wing folks are migrating after they were kicked off of Facebook and Twitter and so forth. But you have your other media also, your other forms of and they're all upholding the system. Some are more extreme than others, but they all uphold the system. The thing that concerns me more than electronic media is what's happening to print media. And I think the electronic media, especially the amateurs, are replacing professional professional journalists. I mean, we have a lot of people on the internet now that just pull stuff together. They pull stuff from that other people have written and they kind of compile it and put it back out. And the people who actually do real research and do fact checking, and at least your fact checking used to be in the print media. It's dying there too. But the print media is dying. And there was a time when you had print media, for instance, in the 60s, you had so many what we call underground papers. In the white left, the black left, you had the black nationalist papers. You had all of these papers in the earlier 19th century and early 20th century. You had so many papers. You had working class papers associated with certain unions. You had Democratic Party papers, maybe in a Republican Party papers. And over time, you had this monopoly where all of that stuff is you know, pulled into like a single network or just a handful of networks of news ownerships of papers and radio and TV. And the response to that is this other thing where you have this multiplicity of media. Everybody's a journalist now. You know, Marshall McLuhan, you know, he was a philosopher, 20th century philosopher. He said, you know, everybody's gonna get that 15 minutes of fame, 15 seconds of fame or whatever. And he talked about, you know, the medium is the message. That is the thing that we use to present the media, the news or information itself is the information. It shapes the information. And as we move into this multiplicity of sources, you know, we have all kinds of stuff that's, you know, QAnon is coming out, all kinds of stuff is coming out, all kinds of poor information or just just misinformation. So now it's going to be difficult. But the media, my last point, the media never could really make our leaders. The media could break us down, but Black folks followed King not because of the media, but because King was rooted, and his organization, his movement was rooted in our communities. And King was not considered, at least early on, as a safe person. In fact, at one point, J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, said he's the most dangerous man in America. And he tried to promote someone else over King, and that person fell flat in the community. So, you know, sometimes people people who want to be leaders sometimes take shortcuts and try to jump in the spotlight, but nothing beats having solid work and really being inside of your community. And that's where, and when people know you and know your organization and know your movement, then they will either trust you and understand you and believe you and maybe follow you, or they won't,
Now,
regardless of the media.
it's interesting when you say that, when you talk about people trying to jump in,
Mhm.
because I remember when I took one of your classes at Akron, I always refer back to those classes. And you told me that Dr. King had started, I believe, it was called Operation Breadbasket.
Right.
And then after his passing, Jesse Jackson took that and that became Operation Push. Was it something like that?
Yeah, he took the concept of Operation Breadbasket to Chicago, and Operation Breadbasket was just part of the Birmingham movement plan. And in addition to like flooding the streets with people, with so many people, you couldn't lock anybody up. And let's say you had so many people in jail where you couldn't lock anybody up anymore, you lose ability to control everybody. And but in addition to that was Operation Breadbasket, where you're going to hit the people in the pocket, the local power structure in the pocket through boycotts. So Jesse Jackson took that to Chicago, that concept and the idea, and he began to really run these very effective boycotts. And I don't know if you remember Texaco. They had this situation with Texaco, and Texaco was involved with some racist thing, and the next thing you know, there's no more Texaco. The boycott was so effective. So he took that notion of the so the King was saying in that march just before he died, he said, if we can't work at Wonder Bread, I think it was one of these bread companies, then we don't need to buy Wonder Bread. And that was part of that concept that we and not just boycott buses, but we can boycott food, clothing, all of that. And that was part of what made the Birmingham movement successful. And the Birmingham movement of '64 is what got us the 1964 Civil Rights Act, came out of the Birmingham movement.
And that's good to hear that King, like our people follow King at that time, because of course that was before my time. I can only go off stories I'm told. King, they followed him because he was in the community, because I always thought, I never doubted his sincerity or his work, but I always felt like he was more propelled by the media because he was safe. So that's actually great to hear.
Well, by the time Malcolm came along, I mean, by the time Malcolm began to, and some of the younger SNCC people began to emerge, right? And then where King at first looked like a big radical, and he was radical, and now you have younger people coming up, like we say, Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael at the time. What's the sister's name? I can't think of her name right now. Ruby Doris Robinson. You have those folks coming up, but then also you have people like Malcolm saying, "Hey, I'm not just going to stay up here in Harlem. I'm coming down here, and I'm going to be involved in this movement too." Now you shift. Now, if you have a choice, King, who looked like the old radical, now all of a sudden doesn't look that radical anymore. And so now you put the harsh spotlight on, you put the negative spotlight on Malcolm, and you put the positive light on King. But King had his base. Remember, he had formed not only that SCLC, which was an organization of churches and other organizations. He had formed several it was really a united front of organizations. And so he developed a model that was very useful in the South. And so he had a firm following in the community that the media, even when people began to make reports about King's personal life and stuff, it didn't have an impact on breaking his followers' support, because they saw him as a person who was willing to sacrifice for the movement, and they liked the direction that he was taking the movement. Many people did. He was the one leader at the time of his death, he was the number one leader in Black America. He was the number one leader. And actually in 1968, when he died, he was number one. Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael was number 2. And among younger people, Kwame was number 1. So that was the leadership profile when we looked at the surveys at the time.
Let me ask you, and Dre, I want to hear your input on this too. I want to hear both of your opinions. When John Lewis passed away, remember Bill Clinton, I guess in his desire to give praise to John Lewis, said, you know, at one point, the civil rights movement was looking to go either the John Lewis way or the Stokely Carmichael way.
Right.
And thank God John Lewis won out, you know. And when we talk about that kind of manipulation, Dre, I see you laughing. What did you think about that statement?
Oh, Bill. That was Bill being Bill, looking to secure whatever it is he's trying to secure in the future. The way I took that, I mean, it's almost, essentially, it's a lot like his own household, but take 2 white people. John Lewis was one person, Stokely Carmichael was another person. Kind of, and if you think about the juxtaposition of the two, it kind of reminds you of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Are you going to take this one or are you going to take that one? But I mean, it was his way of denouncing the radical movement that was, you know,
Right.
Stokely Carmichael, and showing light. And we all know the work that John Lewis has done. I mean, there's no denying that or dismissing that. However, you can't dismiss the work that Stokely Carmichael did as well. You know, you have to look at it in the sense of, and, you know, just because, what did he get, a heart transplant from a Black person? I think Bill Clinton got a heart from a Black person or something like that.
He sure did. I've forgotten all about that.
Yeah, so that doesn't give you an automatic Black card. Like, that heart didn't come with a Black card. So you can't sit there and just take away from the strides that a Stokely Carmichael, you know, made in the Black community. And it was disrespectful. Didn't need to be said. There was no need to even mention Stokely Carmichael. You know, right. You could have just essentially said the work that John Lewis has done in the African American community will forever be remembered, and left it at that. You know, right. So but that was just one of those moments of Bill being Bill. You know, lift foot, insert in mouth. You know, that's what he does.
Right. Dr. Holmes, what did you think?
Yeah, well, you know, the first thing I thought about when I saw that, heard the statement, was when Kwame passed. He had cancer, and there was a program in Washington, D.C. And before he passed, and all of his old comrades were there, and they were giving him a send-off because it was certain that he was about to die. Yeah. And so they all came to show how much they appreciated him and his sacrifices and his contribution to our people. And among the people who were there, who had great things to say about him, was John Lewis. John Lewis was there, and John Lewis was there to say, hey, you know, we were in the trenches together, we fought together, we had some difficulties, but I appreciated this man's life and what he did. And so this European notion of divide and conquer, mm-hmm. right? This colonizing trick, so to speak, of trying to pit one African against the other. You know, in this kind of battle royal, you know, in Invisible Man, you had the battle royal where everybody jumps in the ring and fighting each other. You know, this is what Europeans do. I mean, this is what colonizers do. And Bill Clinton is a key colonizer because in his idea, Hillary, you know, Hillary and Bill, their notion was that, hey, what we got to do. They had something called the Democratic Leadership Council, and their whole approach was that the Democratic Party had gone too far in promoting Black rights, and that you had to begin to ease away from some of that stuff, ease away from that advocacy. And this was their third wave politics of the 80s and 90s. And when Toni Morrison is a great person, but when she gave him that that black president, first black president title, it kind of went to his head, so to speak. And but he's definitely a colonizer, and he's using that divide and conquer, but it doesn't really work anymore. At least in those cases where we can see clearly, it really doesn't work anymore. And our community has a firm respect and love for Kwame Ture, even when people disagree with him.
Right. And moving, that's a good segue for our next topic. And because we have a few minutes left, I want to make sure we get this in. It's our last broadcast of this Black History Month. So, Black History Month kind of went by quickly. I don't know, what you guys think? Was this a great Black History Month? Was it whatever? What?
I'm just getting started. I spoke to a class at North Carolina State last week about the Africanization of the Low Country. I spoke with another class today, William and Mary, that focused on the foodways of early Africans in America, and how, if not for us coming here, the cultural heritage of food in America would be extinct. When you think of everybody talks about soul food, but we don't break down the individual meals and recipes of dishes within that and understand where they come from. You start talking about the Low Country. If not for people in West Africa with the know-how of cultivating rice, you don't have a culture of rice in South Carolina. It's not there. It's non-existent. When you think of the process of curing meats and killing, slaughtering animals and prolonging, you had indigenous people that were here. But when you start thinking about West Africa and certain things that you find in dishes there, you start to see these same inklings that exist. So it's, for me, as long as I have a voice in these classes, I'm going to continue to talk about how Africans who arrived here as enslaved people pretty much created everything that, when you think of a dinner table, the concept of cooking. I talked about this earlier today with somebody, and it's just like, well, why don't we use plastic bowls for cooking? I said, because enslaved people weren't using plastic bowls, and white people who would write down the recipes as they watch these people cook from memory, they would write down these recipes and talk about mixing in the metal bowl and mixing the wooden bowl. It's because it's what they had, and as long as I have an opportunity to tell people about this research that I conduct, I celebrate Black History Month 12 months a year.
And that's a good point, Dr. Holmes. I'm gonna swing to you because opinions vary so much on Black History Month. You got people like Morgan Freeman saying we shouldn't have it at all, but I don't think he was coming from like any Uncle Tom perspective. I think he was saying, why relegate my history to 1 month? And then you have some that say Black history, we don't need it because Black history is just part of American history throughout the year, whatever the case may be. Where do you stand, Dr. Holmes, as a former, professor of African American Studies, director of an African American Studies department, or chairman, I should say, rather? Where do you stand on the concept of Black History Month in 2021?
Well, I think I'm with the concept of Black History Month, the same concept it was in 1926 when Carter G. Woodson formulated it as Negro History Week. And a lot of people don't understand that, how it worked. But I was fortunate in that I was able to attend a Black school during the so-called segregationist era in rural Virginia, and Carter G. Woodson was from rural Virginia, from Buckingham County, and we followed the guidelines of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, then now it's called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And this is how it went. It was never at first it was like a week, but it was never a 1 week thing. The way, and let me back up just a little bit. There was a big debate in Harlem in the 20s around, and really into the 30s, because Harlem at that time was sort of the capital of Black America. And the question was, which way do we go with the Black schools in the South? Because 80–90% of people lived in the South. 80% of the people by then lived in the South, maybe 90%. And NAACP leadership wanted to get rid of the schools. The Association for the Study of Negro Life and History wanted to use these Black schools as the organizing base for making change in the South. And Negro History Week was a very important part of that. Later on, W.E.B. Du Bois sort of sided with Carter G. Woodson, in the sense that Du Bois said, why do we want to make all this noise? But around in the 30s, he was saying, why do we want to, try to do this integration where our kids will go into these schools when they'll be victimized by people who don't like them, who hate them? And for that, he was kicked off the board of the NAACP. So here's the way it went. When I went to school in September, the first day when you walk in the classroom, the first thing you saw was pictures of Black people all around the classroom. And each year there was a new kit that was sent to the schools by the association for the study of Negro life and history. Those people were people we studied throughout the year. And there were themes. Each year there was a theme. There was a history theme, and we were to investigate that theme throughout the year. And whenever we had assemblies, when the whole school would come together, we would, we'd have, in our assemblies, we would listen, we would, have Langston Hughes poems and plays by, Black authors and all the skits, and we see Black movies and all that stuff. But we would also be continuing the theme. So throughout, and the theme would also be woven into our classes. So when Negro History Week came in February, that was the time when we showed our parents what we had learned from September on about, in terms of this year's work, this year's theme. And there would be plays, there would be skits, there would be music, there would be reports, and people would recite poems, and people would do research and that sort of thing. So it never was. People say people say it's a short month and all this. It never was really. They don't really know the history. They don't really know the process. It was always an academic year process. It was never the way it was conceived, and when it was implemented properly, it was never a 1 week or 1 month process. Now, what happened? As Black students left, we took the Black high school into white universities, because the Black universities, HBCUs already had Negro History Week. We took the Black high schools into the white universities. We brought we had a culture, and we brought our culture with us when we went when we integrated these universities, and we fought to establish our culture inside of the universities as part of Black studies, but also part of Black History Month. We call it now. We went from Negro History Week to Black History Month, and later some people said African History Month. So it never was conceived to be, and never, when operated properly, only 1 month. It was always a year program from September to February and beyond. with the February thing, just the exposition, public exposition of what we had learned. And I think that's something that really we need to promote. And it was very strong, and it was very strong in the rural areas. I mean, the rural Black studies, especially in Virginia, because Carter G. Woodson was from Virginia. We had schools named after Carter G. Woodson and Luther P. Jackson, who was one of his colleagues, and so forth, who were not only historians but activists. This was what we did.
All right. Well, I can think of no better way to end the last podcast of this Black History Month than on that note. That's one of the most unique takes I've heard myself on the whole, Black History Month concept. So I just want to thank my co-host, the OG, Dr. Neil Holmes, the oral historian, Andre Taylor. We want to thank all of you for watching us. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.